and we'll meet again and reconvene a week from now. And my dog suddenly decided to play. So for our icebreaker, and we'll try to do this kind of a flow, but I'll start and then I'll introduce something about myself. And if someone wants to make district OER group said, I initially had asked them, can I do this next summer? And then they said, we have money now, do it now. And they're like, by the way, you have to do this by this date and this by this date. So I was rushing to get you guys all seeing if people were interested. And then I was rushing to find someone. And so I contacted Rian and Garth was so gracious to say, yes, I will do this. And so he's full of lots of great accomplishments within our fields and involved in lots of things in service and in teaching. And so I'm very thrilled and excited to have him here. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and give him the floor.
I don't know WebEx. So there I was talking to myself. I'm a Zoom person. We use Zoom. Anyway, I'm complimenting Debbie and Alyssa. Why aren't they respond? Like, why aren't I seeing your face respond to it? Anyway, you guys pulled it off. I can't believe it. Yeah, it just a few weeks ago, we were talking about this and they were putting this together and here we are. So it is my absolute pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me. Again, Garth Neufeld in Cascadia College or at Cascadia College in Seattle. And I am going to share this screen. Okay, so I have some things prepared, but I'm quite fine if we don't get to all of it. I may skip some things. I would ask you to interrupt me. This is going to be a long time together. We're supposed to go till 2:30. But it's going to feel a lot like a lecture if we're not able to to talk. So please, I'm not going to monitor the chat, but please put comments in the chat and somebody will interrupt me or just interrupt me. I'm really okay with that. So what else do I have to say? Congratulations on the rain, Arizona. It seemed like it was not real fun. I spent a number of years in Fresno, California. It's where I did my graduate work, so I do get that that sort of weather. I understand it a little bit. And a point to somebody else, something that somebody else said earlier. I grew up in Canada, and so I've gone like from negative 40-degree winters to 115-degree summers, and Seattle fits me just right. So. So here we go. Let me show you this. Cascadia College is the newest community college in Washington State. It was founded in 2000. I've been in a tenure position there for 5 years. And before that, I was at Highline College, which is one of the most diverse institutions in the nation, south of Seattle. A lot of immigrant students. But Cascadia College is not very diverse. So I've kind of taught at both sorts of institutions, at least not culturally. Anyway, yes, I run TIP Northwest. I did see that there. Teaching Introductory Psychology Northwest is a one-day conference that we run every year. I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but it's in April in Seattle every year, and we invite you to come out and be a part of it. It is a fun time, and all we do is talk intro psych. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let me just check in with you real quick, and this is rhetorical, but how are you doing with the pandemic, with the transitions? I don't know how those have gone at Maricopa in your system, but how are you doing as a teacher, as a person? How are you coming here today? Are you exhausted? We'll talk a little bit more about why we do what we do in just a minute, but I think it's good to check in with ourselves, and maybe all you yoga folks are a little bit better at this than I am, but I do have a hard time stopping sometime and just checking in and trying to figure out where am I coming from as I come into this time, this work today. I've been really, really busy even during the pandemic. I would actually say that I've been more busy than usual during the pandemic. And sometimes I ask myself, and sometimes I was trained as a therapist, and so I had a therapist for 20 years or something like that. But I often have talked to my therapist about, and my wife, not the same person, thankfully, but I've talked to them about why do I do the things that I choose to do? And I know that the literature out there, including literature on teaching, on reflection, I'm thinking about the Gurung and Richmond and Boyson book, Evidence-Based Guide to College and University Teaching, that reflective practice in teaching is one of the signs of being an effective teacher. So I think it's worth the time to take today. And so I want to invite you just to we're going to take 5 minutes, get a piece of paper out, or you can type into your computer. You can shut off your screen if you like, and you can just watch because I'll have a 5-minute timer on. But I want you to write about why you're here today for CreatorFest. And I think that sometimes these things are just good to talk about, to connect us in that way. All right, so intro psych is very interesting. In the Pacific Northwest, we have blackberries. Okay, so I'm going to liken intro psych to blackberries, and blackberries are like one of my favorite fruit. And if you've not been, I don't know how if they grow in Arizona at all, but if you don't have them down there, they are everywhere in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, they come in these beautiful clusters just like this. But they're also invasive, and they take over everything. Okay, you have some, so you know. I saw that come up in the chat. So they're invasive. They take over. Like, I'm looking right over my fence right now, and they're threatening right now. And the problem with these sweet berries is that they also have these on them, these thorns. And if you walk through those, you are in trouble. So blackberries are like intro psych in that it's got all this upside to it, but it's also thorny. And in Seattle, and maybe other places as well, when those bushes get really out of control, we bring in the goats, and the goats actually eat them, and they tame them for us. And so I don't think we want to get to the point where we're relying on goats for intro psych. But intro psych is this blessing and a curse, and it needs to be tamed for some of the things that people already were talking about in the chat. And it's really got to be us, because change will not come through textbook publishers. It won't. They're behind. They give people what people are demanding, and which tends to make them out of date, right? For a number of reasons. And so textbook publishers will go to faculty and say, hey, should we keep teaching, I don't know, Freud as a part of personality? And people will say, yes, you have to do that. Why should we do that? Well, because I teach that. I teach it there. And so the textbook publishers say, well, we've got to keep in what people want, or else they're not going to purchase our books. Do you see how that is faulty? And so it's got to be us that changes intro psych. Change is not going to also happen by individuals working in isolation with each other. So we've already heard on the chat from one person who just said they just wanted to feel connected about Psych 100. Good, because working in isolation, you could have the best class ever, good for your students, but it's not going to change nationally, and there's a lot at stake. Change will come through individuals working together like this. But I'll just say this today, and for your work, this change doesn't happen without vulnerability with this group of people today. About our weaknesses and our strengths, and what we feel competent about, and what we feel like imposters about. I was recently reading the existential psychotherapist Irvin Yalom, who's written a lot of popular books as well. But I was just reading about his early days of doing group psychotherapy. Not that this is a therapy group, okay? But he remarks that it just doesn't work if people are not going to be completely honest about their frustrations about things. So I really would, even if it's uncomfortable at times, encourage you to be honest with each other. You can just read this one. Okay. The problem is, and by the way, I didn't want to pay for it, so I just kept the watermark on there. I don't know if that's okay or not. So anyway, this is how many of us feel. And so when we are asked to contribute in some way, we feel like we don't have much to bring, that this is the imposter syndrome. Toaster head there feels way over his head in this boardroom. And I don't know if you're like me. I often feel like that. I can point to everybody else who knows more about teaching, more about intro psych. They're an expert on the content, and I can really discount myself. But here, I want to first of all normalize that many of us feel that way, and I want to say doesn't matter what we feel. In fact, as the old saying goes, feelings are not facts, my friend. Feelings are not facts. You have something very unique to offer introductory psychology. Even though you feel like a toaster head, you have something really valuable to offer. There's this question that I use in that I used in a classroom a couple of years ago, and we were about to get into doing group work, and students hate group work where I am anyway, and so I asked them to get into their group, and then I said, hey, I want you to break the ice by talking about, in a group project like this, because you've done them before, what are you good at? Like, what's a strength you bring? Maybe you're saying, like, technology is not my thing. Okay, I know I'm not good at that, but I am pretty good at public speaking. If we can have those kinds of conversations, or students can have those conversations, they can start to think about how they're going to approach that group work. And I just did this as like a kind of a one-off 5-10 minute conversation with students in class. At the end of the quarter, we're on quarters, not semesters, so I'll say that as well. At the end of the term, students wrote about that. Multiple students wrote about how that was really a shift for them. Nobody asked them, what are you good at? So I'm going to ask you, what do you do well in intro psych? And Debbie, I'm going to ask you to put us into 3 breakout rooms. Can we do that? And we'll be, can you bring us back in 5 minutes?
I can do that too.
What are you proud of? Or if you could magically change your course, what would you keep? Because we often think about things we wouldn't keep, right? So let's talk about what are your strengths in your intro psych course, and you can go anywhere you want with it. All right? Thank you. You can take something in Psych 100 and help students to understand that it can serve them academically, in their relationships, in their career. And I think just those wins as an instructor where you feel like you're doing a good job. Because I think often people aren't. They don't feel, or not that they're not, they don't feel like they are. So I think any of those times, those celebrations are great. And just to speak to identity, here's a little my counseling background coming out. But I remember watching these videos when I was like in grad school, and the videos they're famous. But a woman was being treated by Albert Ellis and Fritz Perls and the third one, Carl Rogers. And what I realized watching all 3 of those different theoretical orientations, Gestalt and humanistic, and then cognitive behavioral. They were all treating her and effectively, but they were just doing it differently, right? And so that's something that I always picked up on and has always stuck with me since then. Okay, so let's talk about introductory psychology specifically. As Alyssa said, I had the pleasure of co-chairing the Introductory Psychology Initiative through the APA for the last, it's like 4 years in now. Now officially we ended in December. But it's really never, that work is, if you ever volunteer at the APA, your work is never done. Let's just say that. We've talked a lot about intro psych, and I want to give you a brief history, and I want to set you up for what you guys are going to be doing. And let me just say this. I am not aware, and I want to tell you this, I'm not aware of another college in the United States who is together like what you're doing for your system of community colleges. I don't know another one that has organized themselves and taken on these themes. Now, it could be that we don't know about them, but I think this might be the first one. And as the co-chair of IPI, I think that I would be in the loop if there were others. So well done. Thank you for doing this work. Okay. When I think about chaos, I think about the ocean. And sometimes when I'm flying, my wife and I have a nonprofit internationally in Thailand. And sometimes when we're flying over there, I just have to shut that window because I can't think about the fact that I'm over the ocean. It's scary to me. It's chaos. And so if sometimes intro psych feels like this sort of chaos, which has been alluded to already. It's like, it's just disorder, and it can be really confusing for students and instructors alike. You have this textbook or this curriculum where you're supposed to cover it all. I even saw your outcomes, which you guys call competencies. And I saw those competencies and I thought, geez, that's a lot of competencies, right? Like I could feel overwhelmed. Like if I'm a bit of a perfectionist with those kinds of things, or maybe like I feel guilty about stuff, like not doing the things that I think I should be doing. And it's a lot, but it's not unique to you all. It's the nature of the course, as it's been said already. So the nature of the course is confusing, especially imagine if you were like me, early career, getting thrown into a classroom with a book and they just say, go, with no teaching experience. And by the way, most people, we did a national census. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but most people have no formal training in introductory psychology to this point in their career. So like 29% of people that we surveyed, 1,000 intro psych instructors had some sort of intro psych specific teaching support. To this point in their career, I think that number goes way, way down if you say, well, what about when your early career just started? So let me paint the picture of why this is so chaotic, okay? And I think what I'm going to do here is give you kind of some statistics and thoughts that are going to, if you didn't know these things, they're not going to surprise you and you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's why I feel like this, okay? So this is how many students a year take introductory psychology. This is from a Gurung and Landrum article a few years back. That's a lot of students. There are tens of thousands of instructors all doing different things with different institutional, charges. There are thousands of concepts in the intro psych book. There is very little reliability of what a student should get in an intro psych course, although that's coming along a little bit. And then there's the validity challenge. What are they learning and how do we know that they're learning it? And we do that with assessment, okay, but what are we assessing? Like which content? What about true learning? I like to talk about authentic assessment. Is this assessment that is going to be applied and help them in their real lives? There are a lot of validity and assessment issues to think through. Is there time and space for formative assessment where it's not just where we can build up to learning? Or do we have a class of 100 or 300 or 1,000 like some of the bigger universities do? Not to mention modality, right? Not to mention modality, asynchronous, hybrid, face-to-face. Not to mention accelerated quarters or terms. Some of you are on an 8-week accelerated term right now. My friend at Boise State, they do 3-week intro psych courses. What? It's insane, right? So this is the chaos of introductory psychology. And this is not getting, intro psych's not going away. I'll let you read that from a Bridget Hard article. So I'm sorry, this was not the Bridget Hard article that's coming. This is from our census article that just came out in Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Psychology. And this nicely kind of summarizes what we've been talking about. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So this just came out this month, actually. So you can check out this article. This is what we learned about who's teaching intro psych and what they're doing with intro psych. So that's in Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Psychology. All right. Okay. So intro psych's this huge challenge. So what are your personal challenges with intro psych? I think we've talked about a lot of them, but if you have additional ones, could you throw them in the chat? And maybe you agree with something I said. Maybe you disagree with something I said. That'd be fine too. But throw something in the chat. Like, what are the big issues for you? Or share the amount of content. There has to be a permission to let go of some of it, or to do what you said and to actually put it into a reasonable amount of time to learn all of that content. I see in the chat, by the way, I have my screen up, and so what I see is like when somebody writes in the chat, I see like 8 words for 1 second, and that's all I see. So if there is something in there that somebody wants to share with me, please do. But everybody else, I hope you're tracking. I just saw something that somebody put in there about certain content to leave out, that they wouldn't teach this particular content. Yeah, I think that's fine. We need to, the IPI, the Intro Psych Initiative, one of our recommendations is that, well, I'll talk about it in a minute, that you select, that you cover the areas and not the specific content. So I'll talk about that in a moment. I think that if we just sat here, we could probably spend all of our remaining time talking about what is wrong with Psych 101. What are the challenges? What needs to happen? How the institution isn't really supporting the change, or the content and the way that we've done it for so long isn't conducive to change. The good news is I think we've got an answer. We've got a way, at least a step 1 to move forward, okay? But when we get into conversations like this, are we just complaining? I don't think so. I think we're setting up like good research, right? We are setting up the problem because you can't solve it until you know what it is. And so we've got to clean it up. And if you like Marie Kondo, that's what the IPI is going to do for you. And I hope that it's going to be helpful. Okay, but before we get to the solutions, I want to just talk about how do we go from this chaos to order? How do we get to these peaceful waters and make psychology not only work for us and our institution, but work nationally and consistently for students? So what's at stake? Well, we already know we get a lot of students, right? It's the second most taken course in the college curriculum after composition, English composition, which is a required course at most institutions, and this is not. And so students are taking it by choice. And so we have this one-shot opportunity to hit huge masses of students with this course. And so we wanted to do what we wanted to do something meaningful in their lives. Now, my experience is that it's actually a little less than this, but the Center for Workforce, I think it's Workforce Studies. No, this might have been the 2019 article from APA. They put out a special issue every year, and in 2019 they did an intro psych, and only 7 to 13% of students go on to the major. So the engineers, the business folks, the nurses, the teachers, they are all taking it. That's who's sitting in your classroom. We have to let go of the fact that we are teaching to majors. We are not. We shouldn't be. We should be asking different questions than what you would ask if you were saying, will this student go on to the major someday? They won't generally. And so that brings us to kind of a different way to see the course. Of course, you know that there are public misconceptions about what psychology is and what we offer. There were prominent political figures a few years ago who said that once you get a psych degree, you could just go, I think it was Jeb Bush, you could just go and work at a Chick-fil-A afterwards. And so that's kind of how we're seen. But we also need that we know that there's a need for public understanding of what we bring and what science brings in general. Okay. So misinformation, you know that there's misinformation, disinformation out there. And so we ultimately want to do this for our students to give them better academic and vocational and personal help and to really relate these things to their lives. And so that is what's at stake. And here's the quote I was thinking about before. this isn't going anywhere. The reach of the course is projected to grow. There is more psych on the MCAT now than there was a couple years ago. Nursing, which is the second biggest major in the U.S. With top three is business psychology and nursing generally, or healthcare, and generally they need psychology for it, and that's not going away anytime soon. So we have one shot at most of these students for intro psych. What do we want to teach them? And we have the power. Most of us have the power at our institutions to decide how to do this. And so we need agreement and alignment and support in order to do something meaningful that is going to be reliable for students, across the curriculum in the United States and beyond. All right. Okay, breath. I'm going to talk to you about the Introductory Psychology Initiative, but this is probably just a good place to stop for a moment and see if there are any questions to this point, or if something resonated, or you have a comment.
It often isn't explicitly stated. If you look at, for example, the old APA standards for intro psych for high schools that were then applied to colleges, those learning outcomes, or whatever they referred to them, competencies, I don't recall, basically made up the standard Psych 101 textbook. Yet they explicitly stated in that document that really, unless you have a 2-semester course, you wouldn't be expected to cover all of this content. Yeah. And it's just worth recognizing, because I don't know that it's often explicitly stated. And when you see the standard Psych 101 learning outcomes, they look basically like what the APA views as what might be a 2-semester course.
I'll jump in there. I was just talking to as you know, I'm doing the AP reading. I was talking about this before we started, and I was talking to some high school teachers, and just feeling out with them how many classroom hours they get with their students for a full face-to-face class. And it varies. Some of them don't like what they call a block schedule, because that means it's kind of accelerated compared to, so they might get something like 90 hours with their students. Whereas if they have the AB schedule, which is year long, they will get 110 or 120 hours. Do you know what I get with my students? 55. Probably the same as you. 55 hours with our students. We cannot go through that amount of content. And I don't think actually they can. I don't think the College Board model is great as far as real learning, exceptional learning. I think some of it has got to be rote memorization at that point. And so that's changing. They're changing things as well. But yeah, they get a lot more than we do as far as face-to-face with their students.
Hi, Garth. I want to jump in there too.
And so we needed to approach this work, myself and 21 other people needed to approach this work by providing recommendations without being prescriptive. I don't know what's going on in your classrooms and at your institutions and what's required for your curriculum. And so we wanted to just make sure that was wide open. This is one of the reasons, just a preview, that we didn't recommend any content specific coverage. We are totally content agnostic with what our recommendations are, which is quite a feat actually to do, but it's going to allow you to map on your particular outcomes onto what our recommendations are, which is some of the work you're going to do here, which is great. Okay, so here's the history real quick, okay? People really haven't talked. Maybe somebody at the end of a document, like there was a Puget Sound conference, I don't know, 20 years ago that was pretty big for undergraduate psychology. This is where the college-wide outcomes came from through the APA, and one of the things they said at the end of that document was, these things should trickle down to Psych 100, and that's kind of where it started. That was the first kind of call out for Psych 100, but then the last 10 years have been pretty fruitful. So if you've never seen this document from APA, Strengthening the Common Core, you should check it out. They had 5 different outcomes that we now, looking back, we can see that some of these things we actually accomplished. So that's good. We're kind of following the map of what was recommended. In 2016, a major article came out in American Psychologist, and this was dealing with the content in Psych 100. You've probably seen the pillar model before as far as content selection. Now, if you haven't, what we found in the census is that most people have, actually. Most of the instructors that we talked to or surveyed have seen it. And so this is it. This is what came out. It's changed now a little bit after our work, but this is it. And so here was the charge. And I got to tell you, as an imposter feeling instructor, when I saw these things, it was very helpful because I was teaching way too much content. And what they said was choose 2 areas. So we've got the pillars, which are kind of domains, biological domain, cognitive domain, and beneath each of those, 3 to 5 or 6 areas underneath those. They said, choose 2 under each pillar, and that will give you a well-rounded psychology course. Okay? So that's what I started to do, is choose 2, which means I left out, a third of the content of a traditional Psych 101 course. That changed everything for me. I was able to do some of the things I wanted to do for deep learning once I was able to do that. So that came out of that article in the American Psychologist. Following that, an assessment working group through APA put out assessment of outcomes in the introductory psychology course. And so, by the way, I'll send my slides to Alyssa so that y'all can see these. But this is, if you just Google this APA PDF, this will come out. These are short documents. They're, 20 pages long or something like that. And they have examples in them. They show you how to assess, maybe in ways that you haven't thought about before. There you go. Thank you, Alyssa. I appreciate that. This turned into Project Assessment, which is a free online tool that you can just go and sign up for at pass.apa.org. And this is where these are peer-reviewed assessments, and they are across the curriculum, so not just intro psych, but they do have intro psych specific assessments in there, and they're peer-reviewed. Okay, so that brought us up to 2017 when APA decided that they wanted a group to specifically work on intro psych. And that's really the only charge they gave us. They said, here's the stuff that's been done. What do you want to do with it? And so it started, it was an application process, and 10 of us were chosen to do this work. And then we brought in 12 other people, and it turned out to be this group. Okay. So Regan Gurung and I co-chaired it. The leads on the different areas were Jennifer Thompson and Kristen Whitlock, and then down to course models. That's Bridget Hart there from Intro Psych fame, like Sue Franz. The charge that we had was what works best and how do we know? So that was the 2 questions that we decided to answer. What works best and how do we know what works best? This turned into, after 3-4 years of work, this book, which is coming out in August. And this is evidence-informed recommendations about intro psych. And it follows these 4 areas. And so you'll probably want to get your hands on that. It's, it is the, oh, you already ordered copies. That's great. I forgot you could do that. Yeah, so this is a great resource in all of these different areas. So tell Alyssa to order it for all of you. I'm just kidding.
Order it.
All right. So here, I'm going to speed through this a little bit, but course models and design, teacher training and development, student success and transformation. But the one we're talking about today is student learning outcomes and assessment. Okay, and this will turn out to be the jewel in the crown of this intro psych work. I promise this is the one that's going to get the most coverage, that people are going to be working on the most, because it addresses a need. Like sometimes when things go viral, you wonder, like, what itch was that scratching in people, right? Like, why did everybody find that really interesting? And here are those themes. Okay. Now the first 2, there's 3 learning outcomes. Okay. The first 2 we're not going to talk about in bold there, but those you would see in pretty much any intro course. Your course has these already in it. It's the key themes, the third part, those integrated themes that you're going to do some work with. And these are the ones that our group on student learning outcomes worked for like a couple years wordsmithing. Right now, this is going through APA. It's kind of in step 2 of 3 of becoming APA policy for the introductory psychology course. We're hoping that goes through. It's no easy task. you will notice that these are content agnostic. They don't talk about classical conditioning. They don't talk about, personality theory. They don't talk about any specific part or area of psychology. They are cross-cutting across the curriculum. So one of the things that I'd like to do right now is Alyssa sent you all these themes. These themes were made available to you. If you could pull that up, and there you go. I think it's in the chat. You guys are so on it, man. This is nice. I want you to open that up. We're going to break out for 5 minutes. Okay. And here's what I want you to do. Alyssa and Debbie, maybe you can take over. I want people just to, in 5 minutes, breathe. This is going to be like you're dipping your toes into the waters of integrative themes. You're going to do this more later with Alyssa and just the rest of you. But I want you to quickly connect a topic or concept with one of the themes, and then we'll come back together. Okay. My own classroom. And I got to tell you, these themes really didn't come out until the last year. And it was a pandemic. And so I began implementing integrative themes into my course. And I did it really in a simple way. And I just want to let you know it can be simple, and you don't have to destroy your course. You can take what you're already doing and just layer it in, and it actually works. Now, someday you might want to as you get more familiar with it. But here's what you need to know about my course. There are a lot of things that have gone into my course over 15 years of teaching intro psych, right? 3 things in the middle there. Interteaching is the way I do a course design. Some of you might be doing like just-in-time teaching or something like that. Interteaching is what I do. I have really enjoyed kind of dipping my toes into spec grading, specifications grading, which you might not know what that is, and that's just fine, but it's awesome. You check it out. It's very strategic. And then authentic assessment, which I've talked about already. So here are the new pillars. You can see that the roof line of the pillars are these integrative themes, and this is what pulls together all that content. And so now we've taken this a step further. Okay, so here's my interteaching course cycle. And Alyssa, do you want me done in 2 minutes, or can I go a couple minutes over? Is that all right? Okay,
Yes.
So here's my interteaching course cycle. And so interteaching is not hard, but this kind of is reflective of it. I have my students read. Then I have them do retrieval practice, which is tests that are graded. For accuracy, essentially like multiple choice tests. This is before they get to my classroom at all. Then they decide. Then they do written responses. Okay, and I was telling somebody my students write more than they would probably in an English composition course. It's mostly short answer writing application, and they respond to it. Then they review their answers with their peers, with me, and then at the end of the week, they revise. And I do this every single week with them, so it becomes this cycle, okay? And that's how my course is generally structured. So this is a question I might give them about group influence, okay? Using 3 concepts from this section illustrate how the presence of others can help or hinder a group project at Cascadia College. Use your own experiences to illustrate. I want this to be authentic to their experience. I want Psych 100 to be meaningful to their experience as a student, to their relationships, to their careers.
Yep.
And then here we are to the revise piece. This is one way that I've integrated the themes. Okay. So instead of reading all that, let me just tell you that students get to choose a path for the revision. They can either do, and it's about a 60 out of 80 or a 75% path, and this is a specifications grading strategy, where they just revise their answers. Or they can choose the 100% path, where they revise their answers like the rest of their class, but they also do an integrative theme, where they add a paragraph to each of their answers that connects it to an integrative theme. Super easy. I just put this one sentence in at the end of what I'm doing, and I make it optional for them if they want to earn the full points, okay? Here's my initial strategy for it. I introduce the themes early. I talk about them, these 7 themes. When they come up, I say, hey, what about this theme? How does it apply here? Or I tell them about how it applies. I allow students to begin to work on themes on their own through these assignments. And then I assess their understanding of the themes. So I just showed you that pathway, that 100% pathway where a student could revise their work and use the themes. And I just pulled this kind of randomly from one student's work this spring, where they said this particular question, I'm applying it to theme 5. Applying psychological principles can change our lives and communities in positive ways. Wrote a nice little paragraph about that, earned those points. Okay, at the end of the quarter, I'm on quarters, right? At the end of the time, I ended up just asking students, how well could you explain these themes to someone? Now, this is self-reported, okay? And so I think it's inflated because it was a scale of 1 to 5, and students were saying that they could do it. But I want to just note something, some interesting data. These low ones, these are the ones that students don't get. They don't feel comfortable talking about. They don't see it necessarily in psych. I obviously didn't help them as much of these. Maybe they're not as obvious. Maybe I didn't spend as much time on them. This is a quick 5-minute survey that I put together, and it gives me tons of ideas about what to do next. Now, my next steps for teaching integrative themes is to do what you guys were doing, which is you're going to put together some assessments. And we did something like this at TIP Northwest this year. And I am going to use these to complement what I'm already doing. Not something new. I'm going to use them. You're going to use them to complement what you're already doing. And themes are a better way to learn this material. Eventually, I will specifically redesign my course around themes completely. And I will do that before a textbook does it. I promise you that. I am going to do it within the next year. Textbooks will come along. Even OER materials will come along. The nice thing about these themes is they work well with OER materials, right? And maybe even better than the traditional textbook. So I'll begin with themes as an outcome, and then I will choose the content to achieve that outcome from the pillars. And then I'll assign the reading based on that. And then I will create classroom activities, or I will pull them. I'm going to steal them from you all when you come up with them. I'm going to use those in my class. And so that's how I'm going to do it. So what if we can pull this off? What would that mean? I think it's a noble goal. And if we can do it, then we're part of this community. And this is a new Facebook page, private group that you can just apply to. You'll get in. We're not really turning people away. It's the hub for intro psych. And if we can do this and get consistency across the curriculum with lots and lots of people, then we can actually change the way this course is taught and what it's going to mean for students. So I think that the effort that you're putting in today, showing up here, is worth it. It's going to be worth it. Come to TIP Northwest. Join us in April 2022. I would love to see you there. And we'll just talk intro psych. We're going to be back in person, which is really great. Read the recommendations. Join a community of practice like this one. It's usually grassroots, right? Somebody says, hey, do you 3 want to get together and see what we could do about actually working these into our classrooms? How would that work? And then make sure to stay up with apa.org. We're still sending out updates about this. So you're going to go to apa.org/IPA, go to the Stay Informed link, and then sign up there. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. It's just a gift to be here with you, a pleasure. And I hope that you share this passion about intro psych and what it can do for our students. And I hope that we can do this work together for a long time. And you all are pioneers, so I just applaud your work. So thanks.
And then I believe in collaboration and sharing things out. And so as you can see, the next couple slides, I put a little license on it. And you can see that on the bottom of the slide, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about what that means. Meaning now, in theory, you could all take those slides, reuse them, use them as is, and we'll talk a bit about what these licenses are. But you all getting together in the summer, creating wonderful assignments for Psych 101, and then being able to share that with your colleagues is just why reinvent the wheel, right? And so, and it's beautiful because then there's different people looking at it. You can reflect on it, you can change things, and it's super easy and nice rather than going always with publisher content, which sometimes, I don't know about you, but when I was teaching, some of this publisher content just did not align with the objectives that I had, did not align with some of the competencies that we had. And so it was really hard to justify sometimes why I was making my students pay like a lot of money for a textbook that I'm barely going to be using. So what are Creative Commons and license? And so what I want to talk about first is copyright. And you probably all heard about copyright. And so just because we find things online, and I've worked with a lot of faculty who was like, oh, I found this online, it was really awesome, does not really mean that it's available for us to reuse, right? So we need to be very, very careful because basically copyright is a form of legal protection for the authors of their original works of authorship, right? So including anything literary, dramatic, musical, artistic works. We don't even think about that sometimes. We think only about text, but anything that is musical, dramatic, artistic, all of that, it's like an author who put this together, right? And so copyright basically is really all rights reserved to that author. And, you know, you've heard maybe of copyright infringement. So if you use the work and you don't, without their permission, then you are actually going against the law and you could be sued and it could get into a really big issue, right? And so usually you'll see that work and it'll say like the little C, as you see in that little picture on the bottom right, it says copyright, all rights reserved. And as you see, I am using an image out of Creative Commons, giving you the license because that's what I usually use. I don't even try to find anything on the web anymore and try to get permission and go through that trouble because there's so many things out there that are open. But that's basically what copyright is, right? So I wanted to start there just to show you that this is really kind of locked for the authorship. They have the right to say this is copyrighted. I don't want anybody else to share it and use it. We're at Maricopa, we're moving a little bit more towards open, and this has been happening for many, many, many years across the nation and internationally. So it's really great that we have a lot of push for the open education resources. So the next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is the public domain. So that's obviously an awesome domain because it basically is not protected by copyright, meaning you can use it without permission. If it's in the public domain, go for it. Use it, take it out, do whatever you want with it, right? So it is usually basically things that end up in the public domain are things that have either have some rights, intellectual property rights, but they expired, or they're forfeited, or they're just inapplicable, right? And that little symbol where you see the C, you know, basically scratched through, that basically tells you it's the public domain, or it will say somewhere this is on the public domain. So these are awesome resources. They're not always as many useful things in the public domain because there are not as many who are not going to license their work, right? Because in the end, you are doing the work, and as authors, we want to license them so we can show that we did the work and that we can get credit for it. But it doesn't mean that we need to totally copyright it so that we can't even allow anybody to share it unless they email us and ask us for permission. And let's face it, I don't know about you, but I get way too many emails to also have to deal with somebody asking me to use my work, right? So public domain is, you know, pretty open. Use it, enjoy it, have fun if you find enough things on there that, you know, it can be useful. So I'm just moving through these steps. Like I moved from like super, super locked to super, super free, right? And so kind of in the middle are the open educational resources, right? And part of the OERs is like you can remix, reuse, depending on the license that we have that the author put on their work. And you probably already talked about ModPress that we have and Pressbooks and the amazing work that you can just use because they're usually licensed, hopefully in a way where you can reuse them. But the push for open education resources, I mean, in Maricopa has been going on for a while, as I said earlier, nationwide, internationally. And so let's talk about licensing. Let's talk about all the wonderful things that you are going to be able to do, and then that you can put a license on, and it's still going to show your authorship, and it's still going to show that you created it. So the open educational resources, they're either in the public domain or they're released with the copyright permissions, right? So open, like things in the public domain will be counted as open, but they allow you basically free use and repurposing by others. And so usually these licenses exist that you can actually, so you as the original creator, you still have clear, you know, rights. You still know it's yours. It's like when people share it out or reuse it, they will, you know, cite you so you know that you're giving permissions to share and adapt your work, but you're also giving credit so people know that you're behind that work, right? And so there are different licenses in the Creative Commons, and it basically gives the copyright holders a way to provide permission so that creative work can be used and that we know how to use them and where to find them, right? So these are very, very important, because sometimes I get people saying, well, I want to use it, but where do I find these, right? And so the next graph is really just going to show you what I went over, is where you have the most open to the, most closed. And basically thinking about it, public domain, really your ownership is waived. You give away all your rights, right? And it's not yours. I'm giving it away. You can all do whatever you want with it. Have fun, enjoy it. I would appreciate it if you mention me that I created it, but enjoy, right? An open license usually gives you a copyright ownership that is retained, but you grant rights in advance, right? So that you don't have to ask somebody for permission anymore. Because when you put an open license on there, they'll know that they can use it according to what license you choose. So it is mine as the creator, but I allow you to take it and do some things with it depending on my permission. And then usually, not usually actually, you will have to do proper attribution to the author, right? And then all rights reserved copyright is totally retained, and you does not grant you any rights to use it in the public. It's totally mine. I don't want you to use it. If you want to use it, you definitely have to ask my permission, and I get to decide if I give you that permission or not. So what you're going to be using are Creative Commons licenses for all the great activities and assignments that you're going to be coming up with in this CreatorFest. And so you have basically 4 different licenses, or 4 icons for the licenses. And then when you combine them, you can get up to 6 different licenses. And I'll talk to you about those 6 different licenses here in a minute. But you have that first icon, which is that little person, which is basically the license that says buy, right? So you can allow people to copy, distribute, perform, remix your work, and they have to just give credit to your name as you specify it, right? So if you have a CC BY, then that's basically like, go for it, enjoy it. So these slides, for example, that I put together, I mean, obviously you can see I used a lot of stuff from the open education resources, right? So but I did my slides with the CC BY, because if you want to take them, run along with it, use it for another presentation, go tell your colleagues about it, share it with them, I'm giving you permission as long as you credit me, right? Then you have that equal sign, which is the no derivatives. So basically you're allowing anybody who finds your work to copy, distribute, display, perform your original copies. But what you want them to do is, if they modify your work because you're allowing them to, they must get your permission first. Okay, so that's a little closer than like just a CC BY. And then you have the, I don't even know, upside down C-ish kind of thing, which is basically the share alike, right? You will let others copy, distribute, display, perform, and modify your work as long as they do the same thing with their modified work on the same terms, right? So if they want to distribute modified work under their other terms, they must get your permission. So if I say my license is a CC BY SA, then I'm telling you, take these slides, you can reuse them, and you can adjust things and modify them, but you have to do that under the same terms that I am doing it. So your license has to be the same. If you want to change that license, if you just want to make it CC BY, or if you want to do an ND on it, you want to add an ND on it, you need to contact me and get permission for that. And then the last one is that $sign that is scratched through, so the non-commercial. So you'll let others do all the things above. And unless, of course, if you have a non-derivative on there, then they can't modify it. But otherwise, they can modify it and use their work for any purpose other than commercial, unless they get your permission first, right? So I can't use it for commercial use unless I get your permission. So what does that look like? Because, when you're actually doing these licenses. So again, you have that first one, which is the public domain, right? So you can copy and publish. There's no attribution required. You can use it commercially. You can modify and adapt. You can change the license. You can do whatever you want, right? Remember, public domain is free for all. Again, people do appreciate it every now and then if they get credit, because we know that it's nice to be credited for something. Then you have the CC BY, which allows you basically to do all of these things, right? You can copy and publish. You do need to attribute to the right person. So a lot of times when we think about Creative Commons and things that we find on the Creative Commons, we just think, well, it's open, right? So I can just use it and reuse and do whatever I want, but the attribution is really required. You can use it for commercial use, you can modify, adapt, and you can change the license. If you do a CC BY SA, remember what SA was? Does anybody remember what SA was? Can somebody unmute and tell me, or put it in the
Share
chat?
alike.
Share alike, beautiful, thank you. So when you do a CC BY share alike, you get to do basically everything that you do with a CC BY, or have to do what you have to do with a CC BY. The only thing you can't do, you can't change the license. Again, if you wanted to change the license, you would have to contact the author to get permission. Be like, I know you have yours as CC BY SA. Can I change it? I would just want to leave it open without the share alike. I just would like to do something else with it, right? Then you have the CC BY ND, and what do we know about ND?
Non-commercial.
Okay, that's that's
Non-derivative.
non-derivative. Good, right? So in that one, you can copy and publish. You have to attribute. You can use it commercially, but you cannot modify and adapt that one. So if you see that license on something, you're going to have to use it as is and attribute the author, right? But you can change the license. And then you have the NC, which somebody mentioned earlier, the non-commercial, right? So CC BY NC, which again, you publish it, you copy it, you attribute the person. You cannot use it for commercial use. You can adapt and modify, and you can change the license. And then those last two is the things where you can just put a bunch in there, right? So you have the CC BY non-commercial share alike, which allows you to copy and publish. You have to still attribute. So like you see, the attribution goes all the way through. The only time you really don't have to, you're not required to, is the public domain. Again, it's, you know, nice, but you don't have to. But that's definitely something you have to do for all of them. Same with the copy and publish. You can do it for all of these licenses. So the CC BY and CSA just doesn't allow you to use it as for commercial use, and does not allow you to change the license. And then the CC BY and CND, still can't use it for commercial use. You can't modify and adapt, but you can change the license. So these are these different licenses that you can end up putting on your activities. Now, a lot of times I get the questions of which one should I choose, right? And I know we get very, very protective of the work that we put together, because we put a lot of work into it, and it's like a lot of thought that we're putting into it. But if you are all trying to come together to make, you know, students a little bit more successful, make it more accessible, equitable for your students, and you want to share and collaborate with each other, then it almost makes sense just to keep it a CC BY. Not that I'm telling you what to do, but that's usually the easiest for you to be able to share easily amongst each other. Or you could obviously decide to just put it on the public domain. That's up to you. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the ideal looking forward might be a little nice press book of a collection of beautiful activities that people in Maricopa could use, and if you so please, maybe across the world, putting Maricopa on the map. So that would be something really good to do. Any questions about these licenses? And I know we're running through them, and I think in the first slide, and I think you are all going to get the slides, there is a link to the Creative Commons where you can read more about that. But any questions about the licenses or anything so far?
I have a question.
Yeah, so for example, if you are looking for Pressbooks, and I don't know if any of you know about Pressbooks or open resources already that are out there. So Merlot is one of the ones that has quite a bit of a collection. Pressbooks itself has quite a huge selection. But basically, when you find something, right, you find this material, when you click a little bit on more information, and depending on the website, and most people usually put it right up front so you don't have to dig for it. So sometimes if you're just searching the internet, that might be a little bit more like, oh, where's the license? I need to look for it. But a lot of times in the more open, like organized, open education resources, you'll see, it'll tell you the and this is what it will show. It'll show that little picture with the licenses on, and then it will also say the text, the works is licensed under and this license, and then you'll see that on some of these things. And so and the nice thing is that you can tell very quickly if you're looking through OER, especially through press books, the ones that have a copyright on, the ones that have like certain licenses where, you know, like, oh, I'm not even going to try to look into it because I actually want to try to adapt a little bit to the competencies. And this one tells me I'm not allowed to adapt and modify. So, you know, it'll be an easy, nice search. And it's a lot of times what we think only about, you know, I'm pulling a chapter or text or whatever. So don't forget about videos, images, all of that stuff needs to be openly licensed if you want to reuse it, right? And so obviously there's a lot of like Flickr, you know, all these different websites where you can find images that are already openly licensed. Some of them are in the public domain, some of them are openly licensed, you just need the license for it. But you can also find, I lost my thought, but yeah, pictures. Oh yeah, if you Google, like a lot of time people are like, I don't want to go to an extra site. I usually just open a tab. It's already on Google. I want to search in Google and go. So I don't know if you all know about the way to search in Creative Commons within Google. So you can obviously go to Creative Commons and search for images, but if you're in Google, and I don't know if you have a tab open that you could maybe share. I forgot who's sharing. Elisa, are you sharing?
Yeah, just give me a minute.
Yeah, sure. And so if you're just searching for whatever in the tab and you're looking for images, what you see is and choose, I don't know, whatever you want, flowers or psychology, cool. So if you go to images, because you're looking for images, you see on the very top right, you see that something calls tools. And when you click on the tools, you see usage rights. And then that's where you can see, like, Google will show you all. And so most of these pictures are going to be copyrighted, right? And so if you click on Creative Commons, you'll get the ones that are only Creative Commons licensed. So you know that you're going to be able to use any of these pictures as long as you attribute them if that's what they're asking for, if it's not in the public domain, right? So it was under tools and then the usage rights. In case that went a little bit too fast. Any questions?